I'll let this slide just this once. What is he even talking about? He seems so clueless. Maybe it's time to bring him back to reality. My name's Olivia, I'm 32 years old, and I've been married to my husband, Mason, for a year now. We met at a casual party a friend hosted. We hit it off, started dating like most couples, and eventually got married. We weren't getting any younger, after all. Mason isn't the most exciting guy, but he brings a sense of peace to my life. I thought we'd be together until we were old and gray. We both work, so money isn't a problem. When we got married, I didn't overthink it. I handle most of the housework since we're both busy with our jobs. Mason doesn't help much. He either lounges around or leaves early, spending little time at home. Still, I didn't see it as a burden. My parents lived the same way, so I assumed this was just how life as a wife would be. I work a 9-to-5 job and don't have many hobbies. Mason and I weren't big talkers from the start. We respected each other's space, and it never seemed like a problem. Life just went on. One night, Mason came home late. Probably out drinking with coworkers or friends, I didn't know. "You're home late," I said as I welcomed him. "Long night?" "There's dinner if you want, but I guess it's too late for you to eat." He didn't respond. He just turned away and walked into the living room, ignoring me completely. I sighed. Here we go again. Whenever Mason's in a bad mood, he shuts down. I assumed something at work or during his night out upset him. I knew better than to push him when he was like this. I shrugged it off and went to bed, thinking he'd be back to his usual self in the morning. It wasn't the first time, so I didn't dwell on it. The next morning, I was preparing breakfast when Mason walked into the kitchen. "Good morning," I said cheerfully. He gave me a glance, grabbed some milk from the fridge, and left without saying a word. That wasn't like him. He's usually not this cold. At first, I thought he just needed more time to shake off whatever had upset him. So, I didn't press him. I continued making our lunch boxes and carried on with my day. But things didn't go back to normal. Mason stayed distant that night, and the next day too. At this point, I was starting to get worried. I was genuinely worried. Days turned into weeks, and Mason still wouldn't talk to me. I tried messaging him on WhatsApp and even left him little notes, but he ignored them all. The only sign that he acknowledged anything was when he ate the meals I prepared. His lunchbox would always come back empty. I thought maybe slipping a note into his lunch bag might get a reaction. Surely, he'd respond if he found a kind message while eating the food I made with love. But even that didn't work. Mason stayed silent. Before I knew it, over a month had passed in this strange, suffocating silence. I felt helpless. I had tried everything, but nothing seemed to reach him. One evening, I decided to do something drastic. I didn't make dinner. Usually, I'd prepare a meal every night without fail, but this time, I wanted to see how Mason would react if it wasn't there. When Mason got home, I was pretending to watch TV in the living room. He walked in, looked at the empty table where dinner was always waiting, and then glanced at me. I held my breath, expecting him to say something, anything. But he didn't. Instead, he turned around, walked out of the living room, and slammed the front door shut behind him. I was stunned. Why was I being treated like this? What had I done to deserve this silence? I sat there on the couch, feeling completely lost. The next morning, Mason was already gone when I woke up. Curious, I went to the living room and saw a note on the table. My heart raced as I read the words, written in messy handwriting. "Stop skipping out on your wifely duties." Something inside me snapped. That was it. I'd had enough. Why did everything have to be about pleasing Mason? Was this what the rest of my life would look like? We were never an overly affectionate couple, but this treatment was unacceptable. Mason hadn't given me any reason for his behavior, and I had no way to even bring it up. The past month of silence had been unbearable. I grabbed a pen and wrote a response on his note. "I'm going back to my parents' house." Then I packed my things, left the house, and went to my parents. They were surprised to see me suddenly, but when I explained how Mason had ignored me for over a month without any explanation, they understood and welcomed me back warmly. It felt so good to be in a place where I could have a normal conversation again. For now, I was finally at peace. I decided to stay at my parents' house and see how Mason would react before figuring out my next steps. The day I left, I didn't hear a word from him. Knowing Mason, he probably thought I was just trying to prove a point and would eventually give in. Fine, I thought, let's see how long this game lasts. Days turned into weeks, and Mason still didn't reach out, not a call, not a message, nothing. He didn't even bother visiting my parents' house. Before I knew it, 6 months had passed, and Mason was barely even on my mind anymore. Then, one day, as I was leaving the house to go shopping, I saw him. Mason was standing there with an angry, defiant expression. I froze, shocked to see him after all this time. He just stared at me, saying nothing. Was he really still playing this silent game? It was almost laughable. But then he suddenly tried to walk straight into my parents' house without a word. Whoa, hold on there, I said, blocking his way. Mason looked at me, his face twisted with anger and disbelief, but still silent. I warned him, don't just walk in, or I'll call the police. Finally, after more than 6 months, Mason spoke. A smug smile crept across his face as he said, "Look at you, acting all high and mighty just because you're at your parents' house. Since when do you get to talk to me like that?" I remembered Mason being a bit rough at times, but not like this. His tone was completely condescending. As I stood there, lost in thought, he suddenly erupted, "What the hell are you thinking? You've been gone for half a year, just lazing around here while I've been stuck by myself. Get a grip." He spread his arms out dramatically, as if to say, "I can't believe this." Then, in the same arrogant tone, he added, "Look, I'll give you a break this time, okay? Just come home. I'm willing to turn a blind eye to this." His words were so dismissive, so insulting. I couldn't stay calm anymore. "I think you're confused," I said firmly. "You and I are strangers now." Mason's face went blank for a moment, then turned bright red with rage. He started yelling again. "What the hell are you saying? Have you lost your mind? We're married, aren't we? Stop messing around." His outburst left me speechless for a moment, but he didn't stop. "I'm saying I'll forgive you this time," he yelled. "So stop fooling around and pack your bags." Hearing those words made my blood boil. He was acting like he was doing me a favor, like I'd done something wrong. The sheer arrogance of it made me angrier than I'd ever been. It was clear Mason had no idea what had really happened during the past 6 months, or how much I'd changed. I'd finally had enough. Mason was still yelling at me when I snapped. "I already got divorce papers from your mother, signed them, and filed them with the court. So we're not married anymore. Got it? We're strangers. Total strangers. Understand?" I emphasized the word strangers, and Mason's face went pale. He looked genuinely shocked. Here's what had happened. About a month after I moved back to my parents' house, Mason's mother, Helen, called me and asked to meet at a cafe nearby. We were never close, so this surprised me. After some polite small talk, she handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked, tilting my head. "Open it, and even you'll understand," she replied coldly. I opened the envelope and pulled out a divorce petition. It was already signed and stamped by Mason. Confused, I looked at her. Helen's glare reminded me so much of Mason's, full of disdain. "So, is this Mason's doing? Did he say anything about this to you?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Helen sighed dramatically and said, "Oh, he had plenty to say." "Would you like to hear it?" "Yes, please," I said with a polite smile. Helen then launched into a rant. According to her, Mason had been complaining about me for a while. He told her I was a lazy, useless wife who stopped doing housework after we got married. He claimed I quit my job, lazed around all day, and ran back to my parents' house whenever things didn't go my way, like a spoiled child. Helen's piercing gaze never left mine. It was obvious she believed every word of Mason's lies. When she finished, she asked with feigned innocence, "So, what are you going to do? Not that I want to meddle, but you're being pretty awful, you know." By the time I left that cafe, my decision was clear. I smiled at Helen and replied, if he wants a divorce, that's what he'll get. Helen glared at me one last time, threw some money on the table to cover her share, and walked out. I went straight home, signed the divorce papers, and submitted them to the court the very next day. As I finished explaining all of this, Mason's face turned even paler. It seemed he had no idea Helen had followed through on filing the papers. But honestly, I didn't care. I trusted Helen to pass along the signed papers, and Mason clearly had the same idea in mind, he just hadn't expected me to act so quickly. Suddenly, Mason blurted out in a panic, "No. You've got it all wrong. I only filled out those divorce papers to keep my mom off my back. I never intended to file them. They're invalid." He started rambling, making no sense. Then he said, "Besides, you'll be the one who suffers if we get divorced. Let's go to the court right now and have them withdrawn." His words were desperate, but I wasn't about to let him drag me back. I gave Mason a cold, hard stare. Then I tilted my head and asked, "Why would divorce be a problem for me?" Mason suddenly grinned, acting like he had the upper hand. "Think about your age. At your age, with a divorce on your record, no one will want you. That's why I'm saying I'll take you back. This is for your benefit. You should be happy." I couldn't help but roll my eyes at his arrogance. "Listen, Mason. Divorce doesn't just get erased. And for the record, I'm already married to someone else." Mason's jaw dropped. "What? Really? Do you want me to repeat myself?" "I'm married to someone else." Mason looked stunned for a moment, then started ranting. "That's a lie. You're just making that up to get rid of me. You think I'll fall for that?" Before I could respond, someone walked up behind me. It was Noah, my husband. He stepped out of my parents' house, looking confused. Mason froze, staring at the stranger in shock. Noah glanced at me and asked, "Is something wrong?" Feeling awkward, I smiled and introduced them. "Mason, this is my husband, Noah." Noah nodded at Mason, looking slightly skeptical. Mason took a step back, clearly overwhelmed. Noah was a former rugby player, and his strong, imposing presence made Mason visibly nervous. Mason quickly started making excuses. No, you've got it all wrong. My old boss told me to do this. He said to put you in your place, and I listened to him. But hey, he got dumped by his own wife and kids, so what does he know, right? I never wanted any of this." I stared at Mason, disgusted. His excuses were pathetic. Then Noah spoke up firmly. "I think it's time for you to leave. If you come near Olivia again, I'll call the police." With that, Noah stepped forward and ushered Mason out of the doorway. Mason, intimidated, stumbled away and left. For a while, Noah and I stayed cautious, worried Mason might hold a grudge. But as days turned into weeks, we never heard from him again. Curious, I later reached out to a mutual friend to ask about Mason. They filled me in. Apparently, Mason quit his job shortly after showing up at my parents' house. He had always supported his boss, who was known for harassing employees. When the company forced the boss to step down and transfer to a remote location, Mason was expected to follow. But out of pride, Mason quit instead. Now, he's jobless and struggling. His arrogance makes it hard for him to find work. He refuses interviews even when recruiters reach out. To make matters worse, his mother, Helen, disowned him after learning about his behavior. Our friend sighed, he spends his days drinking and blaming his old manager for everything. Honestly, if he keeps this up, he'll ruin his health before he finds another job. I doubt he'll find another spouse either. We both chuckled at Mason's downfall, then hung up. As for me, my life with Noah has been wonderful. Interestingly, Noah and I were co-workers, and he pursued me after hearing about my divorce. Though I was hesitant to date so soon, his kind and confident nature won me over. We married 6 months later. Noah later admitted that he had always had a crush on me and was heartbroken when I married Mason. I laughed and apologized for not noticing his feelings earlier. Now, Noah helps me around the house, something Mason never did. He always compliments my cooking with a warm smile, and these little things bring me so much joy. I never realized how numb I had become to Mason's indifference. With Noah, I'm living a happy, sparkling life. I'm certain we'll share this joy through our golden years.